Okay, so you need or want to take apart your Virpil grip. This is how to do it for the Mongoose T50. First up, you're going to have to take off two small screws. They're star-headed screws. There's one here and one on the other side. It holds a little serial number plate upon it. So if they're quite wide heads, so just unscrew carefully, take out the two screws and lift the plate off. The next thing you should do is take out this screw here. This one's on the right hand side if you're looking at it from the rear. You take that one out, pull it out, and you can lift out this little movable trigger. The screw itself is one of the long set. There are three long screws in this with flat ends. There's one on there, and then the two here at this side here. These are the main load bearing ones. They actually go through a metal piece that's inside here, and comes out at here. And this is what actually the strongest part of the stick is. So they go through the actual plastic to the far side and actually touch. Just turn it over. Touch these two nuts that are recessed into the plastic. So they take quite a bit of torque. So you've taken out taken off the little plate. Next, like I said, you take off the one here to lift out this trigger, and then you can start disassembling from right to left. So take these two out. This screw, this one at the top here, and this other one are all the same size. They are, I think, about 5 or 6 mil, and they are self-tapping ones, as in they've got a sharp point. This one at the top here is it's the same type but slightly shorter. So make sure you put the right one in the right holes if you're reassembling it. So that's basically it. You take all these screws out in order, working from right to left, and then you can lift the part. I lifted from this sort of side up and then pulled it slightly out onto the right, and that lifts off the whole top enclosure. Now you'll find there are two little cables. They're attached, one for this switch and one for this other switch, and there's two little ports on a board below this. The top switch goes to the top one and the bottom switch goes to the bottom port, and then when you unplug them, that's it. You can lift off and you've got the main part of the stick assembly apart. Now, I didn't go any further, but there's obviously other screws at the top here, this other one, and I think that's what basically lifts off the whole top part here away from this whole bottom assembly. I didn't need to go that far, because all I basically needed to do was get inside here and correct a mistake that was made when this unit was actually constructed. That's the top part of the joystick. It can be released. You sort of lift it from the bottom up and sort of slide it out a little and back. Now there are two other little connector boyos you see here, and they will be connected to these two little connectors on this board. The bottom one goes to the bottom connector, the top to the top one, and that's it. Once you unscrew that, lift this off and unplug those, and you can gain access to the rest of the stick here. It's actually quite crowded in there inside the top cavity part, because there's a small interface board, a whole bunch of connectors going to the hat switches and buttons, and then it runs into these three cables which run down into the interface board, and this is the little connector down here that runs down to this little end here. So that's basically how to take the Virpil stick apart if you do need to do it. I haven't got round to reassembly yet, and that'll always be fun and games, but I've quickly been able to slip this back on top and make it match up quite easily, so I don't see it being a major problem. Only thing I could say is, if you are taking it apart, just be careful, because you do have this spring that is on the trigger, and just be careful it doesn't fly off into outer space or around your room somewhere, and you have to go hunting it. And that's the Virpil stick. So here is the aftermath of me after I have taken my Virpil joystick apart. Now I was having problems with the trigger button, the second stage, not engaging properly. And after I stripped it apart, I discovered what the problem was. Basically twofold. There was two problems when this was being made, so this is a fault from the factory. First problem is, see this little cable, these little ribbon cables here? There's actually three stacked on top of each other, and they carry all the wiring from the top part here down into the main interface board, which then goes down the cable and out into the actual unit itself. Now the problem is this. These cables are supposed to be secured down with some hot glue. There should be some hot glue at this side and a strip running across this bottom bit, and some here across this bottom, because that right here in the middle that's the anchor point there where the red button normally goes, and it pushes across here to touch these two buttons. This button is actually lifted out. It should be in here. That button should be in this little recess here. And the second problem was that the wiring for this one, which is this little switch here, it's the top one, that was wired down here under these three ribbon cables and then up into the recess where this little button is held. And that was making these cables sit very proud. And whenever the actual button was in here where it lives, it was catching on these cables and compressing them. So that's why it required so much force to actually get the damn thing to go to second stage trigger. Because having to push these cables back to get to this little boy here, the second stage switch. So those were the two faults with this. Okay, so here is the joystick after performing the repair. First off, I've got the old trusty hot glue gun out and put a blob along this point here to hold this part of the cable down, and then pressed on this point while that glue was setting to keep it nice and low. I then got more hot glue and put it along this part here and pressed on here to also keep the cable as low profile as it possibly could. And now that the glue's set, it's pretty good, and we're going to sort of reassemble and test the stick, which I'll do just now. So I've put the trigger button back on again, and let's just test it out. Of course, there's a little spring there that goes to the first stage. Okay, stage one's good, stage two's good. So the red button's now moving freely backward and forward, because I've finished off what they didn't do inside the factory, which was glued these cables that run underneath it down to stop them actually getting in the way. Now I'll just reassemble the joystick. And when you come to put it back together again, it's basically the opposite. Get the cables back in here, because you're probably going to lift that and get that out of the way. The trigger you need to put into the wee recess hole here. I would suggest that you put the spring into the little trigger enclosure. There's a little hole for it, a little recess here, and set it around the little switch at the top. That's the stage one trigger, and then lift it and set the unit in sort of side. You can see just by pressing it forward and backward to make sure it's actually correctly aligned, because it will switch one switch and then the other when you push it all the way in. Make sure it's nice and free. And whenever you go to put the top enclosure on, you might have to sort of wiggle it a wee bit to get it to go in, and actually the top part of there's a little hole, a little recess on the top of the red switch. So it's going to be recessed on one side when you set it on. And you just want to align the top recess, or a little pin that pokes out. And once you get that done and you gently push it back together again, make sure it all lines up correctly. You haven't nipped any cables. Then it's the reverse procedure. Just put the screws in the same holes they came out of. I would suggest that you make sure the alignment's correct. Down at the bottom here, the metal bit that holds the main sort of shaft part here, you may need to either push it up or down, because there's two little holes in it that line up to these holes. So you just need to get the alignment right and then pop those screws back in. They'll fall quite deep inside until they touch against the back side where the two nuts are that they tighten against. And once you've got all the screws in partially, just go round and very carefully, slowly put them all fully weight tightened. Do not over tighten them, especially the ones that are the pointy ones, because they're self tappers and they're actually tapping into plastic. If you over tighten them too hard, you could ring it and screw the thing up, so your joystick might be loose and you might have to put tape around it or something to stop it from coming apart. But that's it. It's well designed to be taken apart. I mean, I've tried to take apart an X55 before and it was a complete abortion. So I do like the design in the fact that you can actually get at most of the electronics in this without too much trouble. Now, removing or changing electronic parts out is going to be a problem, because once you see the other next part of the video where the inside of it, you'll see that there's hot glue everywhere all over the place. So I don't know how you go about changing certain switches. I just pray they never break, to be honest with you. I hope they're durable switches.
So we've got the joystick back together again. It's plugged into the Warbird base. And let's see what happens. Okay, so the Warbird's selected. So let's have a go and press some of the buttons. Stage 1's good. Yeah, stage 2 feels so good now. Oh yeah. And I'll just go round and press all the other buttons. To make sure they're all working. And you'll notice there that number 6 is not lighting up. And it's like, oh wow, what's the problem? And it's like, there is no physical number 6 on this. It's not bound to anything, therefore there's nothing to light up. So there you have it. Joystick's working again. My trigger's nice and smooth. You know, somebody must be having an off day in the factory. It's shit happens, like. Though to be honest, with the price they're paying for these sticks, they should up their quality control a notch and just get a visual inspection on stuff like that. I've worked in electronic production, you know, for many years in the past, and I know there's generally procedures in place to catch inspection. You know, normally like for something important and especially something's expensive, it should have like a 100% visual inspection before it goes out the door, because it probably would have caught this problem before it arrived on my doorstep and I had to fix it. But it's not a big deal, you know. It took me about an hour taking it apart. The hardest part was using that godforsaken hot glue gun. If you ever used one of those, you know, you blob some glue down and then you pull the thing back and there's this giant spider web of hot glue attached to it you're fighting with for a minute until it cools. So it's all good now.